By the time the little girl reached the center of the marble lobby, the snow had already begun melting off the hem of her coat and pooling around her boots in small gray crescents. The building was so quiet you could hear the heating vents breathe. 48 floors of glass and steel towered above her, polished, warm, expensive, and untouched by the storm that had swallowed half the city overnight. She looked no older than 7. Her dark hair had come half loose from 2 hurried braids. One mitten was red, the other was blue, with a thumb that had been sewn back on by hand using white thread that didn't quite match. In her arms, she carried a backpack with a broken zipper, clutched so tightly to her chest it looked less like school things and more like armor. The night guards had already told her to wait by the door. One receptionist, who had not yet taken off her wool scarf, was speaking into a phone with the practiced calm people use when they want a difficult thing to disappear without becoming their responsibility. Then the elevator opened. A tall man stepped out first, coat draped over one arm, phone in the other, his jaw shadowed with the kind of exhaustion only expensive people think they can hide. He wore a charcoal suit that fit too well, a watch that caught the pale lobby light, and the expression of someone who had spent too many years making decisions in rooms where no one cried out loud. Gabriel Stone, founder and CEO of Stone Meridian Holdings, had built half the skyline and managed to make himself lonelier with every floor. The little girl saw him, straightened, and walked forward before anyone could stop her. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling not because she was weak, but because children should never have to say sentences like this to strangers before sunrise. "My mom never came home last night." Gabriel stopped. It was not the words alone that did it. It was the way she said them, not dramatic, not wild, not even pleading at first, just certain. Certain in the way children are when the world has moved 1 inch out of place and they know, before anyone else does, that something is terribly wrong. The receptionist hurried over. "Mr. Stone, I'm so sorry." She came in through the service entrance when the shift changed. "We were just calling," but Gabriel didn't look at her. He was looking at the girl, at the wet sleeves of her coat, at the purple half-moons under her eyes, at the way she kept glancing toward the revolving doors as if she still believed, even now, that her mother might walk in and apologize for being late. And somewhere beneath the polished machinery of his life, something old and human shifted. Because there are moments a person does not recognize until later, when memory has already turned them into a hinge, a single breath, a child's sentence, a silence that suddenly feels like judgment. This was one of those moments. And if you believe the smallest voice in the room can still carry the biggest truth, take a second to like this story, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters, because some stories don't begin with power. They begin with somebody finally stopping to listen. Her name was Ivy Morales. She was 7 years old, missing her front tooth on the left side, and she had the solemn, careful face of a child who had already learned how not to ask for too much. Her mother, Elena Morales, worked nights in the same building whose name shone across the city in silver letters, Stone Meridian Tower. Elena cleaned executive offices on the 42nd floor and conference suites on 44, and sometimes, when one of the day staff called out sick, she stayed later to polish the glass walls around the boardroom, where men decided the fate of neighborhoods they had never walked through. Every morning, Elena got home by 6:40. 6:40 for nearly 3 years, long enough for routine to become faith. She would let herself in softly, set her shoes by the radiator, kiss Ivy's forehead whether the girl was awake or pretending to be, then warm milk in a small blue pan with a dent on one side. On Tuesdays, she brought home a cinnamon roll from the cafe kiosk if there had been one left at closing. On Fridays, she folded paper napkins into little animals just to make Ivy laugh before school. She was the kind of mother who made ordinary things feel defended, and she had not come home. Gabriel crouched so he could meet Ivy at eye level. He had not done that with anyone in years. "What's your name?" "Ivy. And your mom works here," she nodded. "At night, she cleans the offices where the windows do open." That line landed harder than it should have. Gabriel glanced at the receptionist. Did Alina Morales clock out? The receptionist looked uncertain. "I can ask HR when they come in." "When they come in," he repeated, not loudly, which made it worse. One of the guards, a broad-shouldered man named Malik who had been with the company for 11 years and knew the names of more janitors than executives, stepped forward quietly. "She badge-swiped out at 117, sir. I remember because she asked if the buses were still running in the storm." Ivy turned to Malik immediately, hopeful. "Did she say where she was going?" Malik hesitated. "Home, I thought." Gabriel rose. "Get me her shift logs, security footage from midnight to 2, and call downstairs to facilities." Now the receptionist scattered. The guard moved, but Ivy tugged lightly at Gabriel's sleeve. "She told me if no one listened," she said. Looking up at the face from the annual report photo, she had probably seen 100 times on lanyards and signs and glossy pamphlets. No one at home had a reason to read. To find the man whose name is on the building. For one brief, merciless second, Gabriel couldn't speak. Because children have a way of saying things that strip status down to duty. He looked at the revolving doors. Snow still whipped past the glass in soft white diagonals. The city outside was blurred, dim, unresolved. Then he made a decision his board would later call impulsive and the rest of his life would call necessary. "Show me where you live," he said. The driver brought the car around, but after 2 blocks they had to leave it. The storm had buried the side streets in heavy ridges of snow, and plows hadn't yet reached the older neighborhoods beyond the business district. So Gabriel Stone, who was accustomed to private garages, heated leather, curated silence, and elevators that opened only when they were summoned for him, found himself following a 7-year-old girl on foot through the gray cold of early morning. Ivy walked quickly, though her boots were too thin for the weather. Gabriel noticed the left one had a strip of tape near the toe. She didn't complain once. She kept one hand on her backpack strap, and the other closed around the key Alina had left her on a blue ribbon around her neck. Their neighborhood sat in the older part of the city, where brick buildings leaned into the wind and laundry lines still stretched over narrow alleys in better weather. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building, with chipped green paint on the banister and radiators that hissed like irritated old men. Inside, everything was clean in the way homes become clean when dignity is one of the few luxuries people can still afford. There was a blanket folded sharply over the couch, 2 mugs drying upside down by the sink, a school picture taped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon, a lunchbox ready by the door. On the small kitchen table sat a bowl of cereal gone soft, a spoon beside it, and a note in Alina's careful handwriting on the back of a pharmacy receipt. "If the bus is slow, start your reading book. Love you more than the moon." The note had been written before she left for work. Ivy touched it with 2 fingers. "She always writes one." Gabriel stood very still in the little kitchen, surrounded by evidence of a life so different from his that it should have felt distant. Instead, it felt precise, immediate. Accusing, there were no signs of panic, no broken things, no rushed packing. Alina had expected to come home. A knock sounded at the open door. An elderly woman in a knitted cap peered in from the hallway, holding a plastic grocery bag against her hip. "Is she back?" she asked. Before seeing Gabriel and understanding she needed to stand straighter. This was Bernice Holloway from apartment 3B, 72 years old, arthritis in both hands, insulin-dependent, and too proud to let anyone carry her shopping unless the steps were especially icy. Alina carried it anyway. Bernice had watched Ivy many afternoons, Alina helped with her prescriptions when the online portal confused her. In return, Bernice kept a spare house key and made soup that could stretch across 3 meals if you knew how to season water kindly. "She's not back," Ivy said. Bernice's face changed. Not into surprise, into fear. "Oh, honey," Gabriel turned. "You know Alina well. Well enough to know she doesn't vanish." Bernice stepped inside and lowered her voice as if Alina might be sleeping in the next room. "She picked up a second shift last night because the heat bill came in high. Said she'd still be home in time to braid Ivy's hair for spelling quiz day." She looked at Ivy's half-loosened braids and swallowed. If she didn't get home, something stopped her. That was the first of many sentences Gabriel would hear that morning, which sounded simple and turned out to be indictments. By 8 o'clock, he had the first pieces of Alina's path. Security footage showed her leaving the tower carrying not only her own canvas bag, but 2 rolled wool blankets from the building's lost-and-found shelf. She had stopped by the service desk at 1:09 a.m., signed a maintenance form, and spoken to the overnight property coordinator for 1 minute and 12 seconds. Then she'd gone out into the storm. At 1:31, a camera at a pharmacy on Delancey caught her buying an inhaler refill and a packet of hand warmers with cash. At 1:46, a bus driver remembered her boarding Route 14 at the transit shelter by Mercer. She looked worried, the dispatcher told Gabriel over speakerphone. Kept asking if Cedar Court still had power. Cedar Court. The name meant almost nothing to him at first. That was the shame of it. Stone Meridian owned Cedar Court, a 6-building low-income housing complex purchased 7 years earlier under one of the company's subsidiary names, held in limbo between redevelopment proposals, delayed repairs, and a future everyone discussed in spreadsheets, while families kept living there in real time. Alina and Ivy lived 1 street over. Bernice did too, years ago, before she moved into the walk-up after her husband died. Gabriel asked facilities for the last service report on Cedar Court's boiler system. There was a pause on the line long enough to become suspicious. Then someone said, "I'll have to locate that, sir. Locate it faster." Ivy, who had been listening from the kitchen table with her knees pulled up under her coat, looked at him with the calm brutality of children who do not understand corporate language and therefore are not distracted by it. "My mom went there sometimes," she said, "when old people needed help carrying things. Last night, she said Mrs. Alvarez's window wouldn't close. She said if the wind got mean, the building would get sick. The building would get sick." Gabriel closed his eyes briefly. The city had taught him to think in assets, liabilities, structures, parcels, exposure. Alina had taught her daughter to think in living things. That was when he stopped sending people and started going himself. Malik came with them. So did Tomas Ruiz from maintenance, still in his Navy work jacket, carrying a ring of keys heavy enough to sound like tools when he walked. Snow needled their faces as they made their way toward Cedar Court, Ivy between them, the wind tearing at the corners of flyers stapled to telephone poles. The complex sat behind a chain-link fence where snow had drifted shoulder-high against the corners. 1 security light was out. Another flickered weakly over Building C. The courtyard swings were frozen still, and in the basement windows there was no glow, no heat, no life, but there were tracks, dozens of them, small boots, work shoes. The narrow grooves of a grocery cartwheel. "Church shelter," Tomas said, scanning the ground. "St. Anne's opened in bad storms before." They followed the tracks 2 blocks farther to the church hall, where the smell of coffee, wet wool, and soup met them before the doors fully opened. Inside, 40 or 50 people huddled beneath borrowed blankets under fluorescent lights that flattened everyone's exhaustion. Children slept on pew cushions laid across folding chairs. A volunteer nurse checked blood pressure at the far end. Someone had lined boots by the heater to dry. A toddler cried because his socks were gone, and an old man was patting every pocket of his coat as if dignity might still be hidden in one of them. When Ivy came in, 3 women stood at once. Not because she was loud, because they knew her. This, Gabriel would understand later, was the invisible architecture of poor neighborhoods, the map of people who noticed when a child arrived alone. "Baby, where's your mama?" asked a woman from the church kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Ivy's chin trembled for the first time. "That's why I came." Silence moved through the room. Mrs. Alvarez from Cedar Court Building B, wrapped in a brown coat with one missing button, pressed a hand to her mouth. "No, Alina got us out." Everything in Gabriel sharpened. "What do you mean she got you out?" Mrs. Alvarez looked at him, not recognizing him at first as a man from magazines. To her, he was only a tall stranger in an expensive coat asking too late the right question. Boiler died after midnight. Whole place turned to ice. Wind was coming through the frames. Kids were crying. Mr. Lennox on the second floor couldn't breathe right. We called the emergency line and got a recording. Alina came straight from work with blankets and started knocking on doors. Another resident, a teenage boy in a school hoodie, spoke up. "She made us all leave. Said nobody was staying in those apartments till morning. She carried my little brother down 4 flights because Mama's ankle is bad." The kitchen woman added, "She came here twice. Brought people in groups because some of the old folks couldn't walk fast in the snow." Gabriel felt the cold in his bones then, not from outside, but from the realization of elapsed time. "And after that, she said 2 kids were still unaccounted for in Building C," the boy said quietly, "and Bernice's insulin was still in one of the fridges." "She went back." Ivy took 1 step forward. "Did she come out?" No one answered. No one had seen her come back. The church hall seemed to shrink around that silence. This was the midpoint of the story, though none of them knew it then. The moment when the missing woman became larger than the emergency itself. Because until then, Alina Morales had been one exhausted mother in a storm. Here, in a church hall full of people she had helped save before dawn, her life widened into meaning. A bus driver named Rosa came over from the coffee urn and said Alina had ridden her route all winter when the weather was too rough to walk. And every Thursday she brought a bag of oranges for the driver because Rosa once waited 3 extra minutes so Ivy wouldn't miss school. A 6th-grade teacher from the neighborhood school, Mrs. Patel, arrived carrying dry socks and said Alina had spent 2 Saturdays helping repaint the classroom for free because the school couldn't afford a contractor, and Ivy loved reading corner time too much to see it peeling. Malik, standing beside Gabriel, murmured that Alina often returned half the untouched catered pastries from executive meetings to security. And security quietly sent them down the service elevator to the cleaning staff, and then out to the shelter on Crescent. An elderly tailor named Mr. Joe, who fixed hems in a shop no wider than a hallway, lifted his head from a folding chair and said Alina never let him pay when she picked up his prescriptions in snow because one day was enough of an explanation for her. Small acts, ordinary acts, invisible to everyone who thought power only looked like signatures and glass offices, but this was power too, the kind that kept people alive. Gabriel had built towers. Alina had built a net. And standing in that church hall, with Ivy gripping his hand so tightly, he could feel every little finger through his glove. He understood that his world had spent years mistaking scale for importance. Tomas's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face changed. "Basement fire door in Building C jammed shut from snow pressure and warped frame," he said. "Maintenance log shows repeated tickets. Last one closed without repair 3 weeks ago." "Closed by who?" Gabriel asked. Tomas did not answer fast enough. Gabriel didn't need him to. He was already moving. The walk back to Cedar Court felt longer because now every second had weight. Snow had eased, but the sky remained the color of unpolished tin. Emergency crews were on the way, delayed by blocked roads and a pileup near the bridge. Tomas radioed ahead while Malik found a pry bar in the maintenance shed. Gabriel walked beside Ivy until the fence came into view, then knelt in front of her. "You stay with Mrs. Patel when she gets here," he said. Ivy shook her head immediately, fierce through tears. "She went back because people needed her. This is dangerous. She's in there because nobody listened fast enough." Her voice broke, but she did not look away. "Please don't be slow now. There are words a child says that a person spends the rest of his life trying to deserve." Gabriel handed Ivy to Mrs. Patel, who had followed with blankets, then turned toward Building C with Malik and Tomas. The entry door stuck halfway. Tomas forced it with his shoulder. Inside, the hallway air was so cold it felt metallic. Mailboxes lined one wall. Frost feathered the corners of family photos taped to apartment doors. Somewhere upstairs, water dripped in slow, hollow beats. "Basement," Tomas said. They took the stairs with flashlights cutting through darkness. On the landing between first floor and basement, Gabriel noticed something strange on the handrail, a strip of pink scarf tied in a knot. "Marker," Malik said, "so people could find their way back in the dark." Elena had left a trail. At the bottom, the fire door would not budge. Snow had pressed against the exterior bulkhead beyond it, freezing the frame. Malik wedged the pry bar into the seam. Tomas worked the hinges. Metal groaned. Paint cracked. Gabriel braced both hands against the bar and pushed with them until the muscles in his back screamed. The door gave 3 inches, then 6. A breath of even colder air knifed through the gap. "Again," Tomas said. They pushed once more, and the opening widened enough to slip through sideways into the basement corridor, where their lights found wet concrete, burst pipes. An overturned laundry basket skidded against the wall. The place smelled of rust, detergent, and gas faint enough to terrify. "Gas shut off," Tomas hissed. "Main valve room." Then they heard it, not a voice. A tapping sound, 3 knocks, pause. 2 knocks. Malik turned first, sweeping his flashlight toward the storage rooms near the boiler cage. The beam found a figure on the floor. Elena Morales was slumped against the cinderblock wall, pale with cold. One arm wrapped around a little boy asleep against her chest, beneath the wool blanket from Stone Meridian's lost and found shelf. Beside them, a second child lay bundled in her coat, cheeks red with cold but breathing. Elena's other hand still rested on a wrench against the gas shut-off valve she had somehow managed to close. Her lips were almost blue. Her eyes fluttered at the light. For a second, Gabriel did not move because shock has a way of arriving dressed as disbelief. Here was the woman everyone called missing, not because she had disappeared from her life, but because she had gone one step farther into danger than anyone else. Malik dropped to his knees. "Elena," her gaze struggled to focus. "Kids first," she whispered. Even now, that was her first thought. Gabriel was the one who lifted the younger child. Tomas took the boy. Malik wrapped Elena in another blanket and checked her pulse. She tried to push herself up and failed. "Ivy," she breathed. "She's safe," Gabriel said, and the words surprised him with how urgently he meant them. "She's waiting." Elena closed her eyes once as if that sentence alone had held her together. "Door jammed," she whispered. "Phone died. I heard